おはようございます。朝早くからお集まりいただきましてありがとうございます。ご紹介に預かりました。私はオランダと、日本の関係の歴史をずっと勉強してまいりました。で今日はちょっと昨日までと違って歴史学っぽいアプローチの話させていただきますが、裏のテーマは日本が世界に誇る翻訳文化と申しましょうか。今日本語さえ読めればですね、ポルトガル語ですとか、他の言語読めない言語があっても翻訳された資料に従って、かなりいろんなことができるという、例としてお聞きいただければと思います。英語が得意でないのでペーパーを読ませていただきます。1844, the Dutch king, William II, sent a letter to the shogun. Because of financial problems in the Netherlands, the letter was not carried by a special envoy, but presented by the chief of the Dutch factory to the magistrate of Nagasaki. In Japan, the letter has been called a state letter or kokusho, like many others in the Japanese history. Kokusho is a familiar word for the Japanese when we talk about diplomatic history, but has never examined in the academic sphere. One then is kokusho. Kokusho could be defined as a diplomatic letter of a chief of state addressed to another chief of state. Kokusho exchanged between the Tokugawa shoguns and the Korean kings would serve as a good example. Kokusho from the Korean king were sent on the occasion of enthroning of a shogun or just as means of offering congratulations on a significant event. The text of the kokusho were not so important, but the signatures, seals, and dates sometimes elicited controversy because the style of a letter indicated the nature of the mutual relations. Around the China Seas, kokusho exchanged between heads of state via envoys were the basis of diplomacy in lieu of credentials, introducing and empowering of specific envoys. In order to avoid any connections to his post, an envoy with a kokusho was merely a letter bearer of low rank. Thinking of a Japanese nengajo, oseibo, or chugen could be helpful. In Japan, they are exchanged regularly in order to maintain social relations, not only personal friendships, but also business networks. We could note the regular compliments offered in these communications, but the aim of nengajo or oseibo should not be any petition or negotiation, but just sending regards. The frequency of such correspondence is very important. In the case of nengajo, once a year, and in the case of kokusho, maybe every 20 or 30 years. Would you negotiate and conclude a contract in order to keep social relations in the Western world? Maybe partially yes and partially no. I hope you can agree that it would be difficult for foreigners to take part in such customs. In contrast, European ambassadors was expected to be negotiators. An ambassador would carry a credential with him, introducing himself to be a representative of his superior. His words were received as the words of his superior. Therefore, a European diplomat had to be an orator of a high rank in order to negotiate and to build his personal network in the court where he worked. I quote words of Sakai Tadakatsu, a Tokugawa high official, whose words whose words were translated into English by Professor Leonard Brisset, of Leiden University. Why should their ambassador come to express gratitude for the fact that the Dutch company's merchants live and prosper in Japan? Such business does not merit an ambassador. We only deem kings and potentates of substance when they speak of royal business and not of merchant business, when they request assistance in war or offer assistance. Sending another ambassador will only result in trouble. In the middle of the 17th century, a number of embassies from various European powers visited Japan. The purpose of my talk is to describe how newly arrived Europeans were incorporated into existing diplomatic practices. In 1609, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, started trade with Japan. After the company established its base in Taiwan in 1623, it suffered trouble with Japanese traders visiting Taiwan. In order to ask the Tokugawa government to stop issuing Red Seal passes to Taiwan, the Dutch government of Batavia sent Peter Notes to Japan. Notes carried letters from the Governor General to the retired shogun Tokugawa Hidetada and Shogun Iemitsu. A Japanese historian, Nagazumi Yoko, translated the letters into Japanese as well as the records of the missionary. Notes was welcomed in Japan and treated with a ceremony just like envoys from Korea or Chosen Tsushinshi. Their entourage to Edo numbered 290 persons, and they traveled with 78 horses, of which 70 were at the expense of the shogun. After arriving in Edo, however, Noit suffered a rush of interrogations over who sent him. He was not allowed an audience before the shogun and did not understand the reason for it. As a result, he left Edo in a quite despondent manner before getting permission from the Tokugawa officials. Although Noitz pretended in his report that the shogun should have accepted him as an ambassador and then rejected negotiations if the shogun so desired. The shogun could not accept him as an envoy because it meant that shogun was equal to the governor general, who was merely a subordinate of the Prince of Orange. Please note, I'm not talking about ranks within the entire Dutch or Japanese societies. There was one more point for discussion between the Dutch and Japanese. The letter said that the Governor General Peter Noit with gifts in order to thank Japan for 28 years of Tokugawa kindness to the Dutch, as well as congratulations for the shogun's enthronement. It was a proper contents of a kokusho. But the last sentence introduced Noit as a representative or a negotiator. Actually, Noit insisted he was an official diplomatic representative and tried to negotiate around the dominion of Taiwan. Recently, Adam Kluro fully examined the specific issues involved in this visit to Japan and how Noit failed. Adam is correct in saying that the failure was not because of Noit's personality, but differences between diplomatic customs. Yet, I would like to point out the main problem was not how much dignity the Governor General held, but rather if he was independent. Both Dutch and Japanese sources revealed that there was a long discussion among Tokugawa leaders and questioning of notes concerning who sent the letters and who was the ultimate man in charge of the Dutch residing in Japan. Notes tried to explain the structure of the Dutch political system. We can remember that he was a graduate of Leiden University and an exceptionally intelligent person among the Dutch in the East Indies. As a result of his proper explanation, the Tokugawa authorities understood that the leader who dispatched notes, or the governor general, was merely a subordinate of someone in Holland. However, I don't suppose that the Tokugawa authority got a concrete image of the political bodies of the Dutch. I'm sorry. ポインターがないんですけど、ちょっと日本語で言いますが、将軍は最初オランダっていう国と総督がいるそのバタビア、ジャワって呼んでますが、は同じレベルの国だと思ってたらしくて、でオランダっていう言葉を聞いて、ジャワっていう言葉を聞いて、で同じような国が2つ並んでいると思ったらしいんですけど、ヌイツが一生懸命説明して、オランダはもっと遠くにあるもっとなんか偉い人たちがいる国で、その下だっていうのが一生懸命説明したせいでバレちゃったんですね。それで一番上なら将軍と手紙やり取りしていいんですけど、もしその誰かの下にいる人なら平戸藩主とやれっていうふうに幕府は思ったわけです。After the, sorry, I will go back to my paper. After the North Embassy, the relationship between the Dutch and the Bakufu leaders became worse. The VOC had to stop their trade with Japan for 5 years. When it reopened, the VOC chose a different way. It didn't send any more emissaries, but just merchants. On the other hand, Bakufu built up an innovative system in the 19th century called Tsusho no Kuni, or a state conducting commercial relations to accept foreign peoples without correspondence between monarchs. It was caused not only by the failure of the Dutch, but also the fact that the Ming government was losing its power and the Bakufu could not find its counterpart in China at this stage. Building the system was parallel with a domestic process of forming Tokugawa subjects in order to distinguish them from simply Japanese inhabitants. I would like to point out that the domestic legitimacy of the Tokugawa government derived only from its power. Rituals and symbols supported the idea that the Tokugawa house would protect Japan, but it had to shadowbox with virtual enemies and show the enemies to be not too weak but not too strong. それがそのキリシタンだったと言いたいんですね。Although the shogun did not touch the vassals' dominions generally, anti-Christian policy was a unique exception. Under the policy, people started to be resisted one by one. 宗門人別改め。In such a condition, the Chinese and European diaspora posed a problem. The Portuguese were expelled. The Chinese not officially allowed to domicile in Japan, and mestizo born of Japanese European unions were ordered to leave Japan and prohibited to come back to live. With some conditions, the Tokugawa permitted the Dutch, the Chinese or Tojin, including people from Southeast Asia, to visit Nagasaki for trade, governed by the Nagasaki magistrates. The main condition was to obey the anti-Christian policy. The VOC promised to do so and was actually able to control all the Dutch in Nagasaki. Reporting foreign news, especially on Christian powers, was required of the Chinese and the Dutch. これは当選風説書きというのを収録した改編体という資料ですね。それからこれはオランダ風説書きを集めたものです。 They were ordered to provide news reports of the outside world to the Nagasaki magistrates. I would like to call the Chinese as well as the VOC servants semi or non-permanent Tokugawa subjects. I want to emphasize that the acceptance of the Chinese and Dutch merchants as semi-subjects was a one-sided phenomenon because the Tokugawa government stopped issuing the Red Seal passes and banned the Japanese junks from going abroad. In 1639, the Tokugawa government expelled the Portuguese from Japan. The Senate in Macau sent an envoy to request reopening Macau-Japanese trade in 1640, but the Bakufu executed him. The Macau merchants pled to their superiors in Lisbon for the dispatch of an ambassador to the shogun under the name of the King of Portugal, John IV, who was enthroned in 1640. In 1644, an ambassador was dispatched via Macau to Japan. C.R. Boxer examined this event, but we can now reconsider his interpretation based upon the monsoon documents kept in the Torre do Tombo National Archives in Lisbon. Our institute recently obtained high-quality digital images of the documents thanks to efforts of my colleague Okamihoko. The diary of the Ambassador Gonçalo Squeira de Souza was translated into Japanese by Murakami Naojiro and published in the Nagasaki Shishi in 1938 and in the Oranda Shokancho Nikki in 1957. According to the diary, de Souza did not bring a kokusho but a credential. The aim of this embassy was explained to be a declaration of the enthronement as well as a commemoration of Portuguese independence from the King of Spain. It was appropriate to be an envoy to an Asian monarch, but the real aim was to reopen Macau trade with Japan. De Souza remained on board in the Nagasaki port, and he asserted in his diary that he refused to deliver his credential to the officials. Whether he really kept it in his hands or not, the Japanese considered the letter as kokusho and did not accept it formally. The Tokugawa government decided to treat this visit as a petition for trade and rejected the Portuguese demand because they did not confirm that the Portuguese would obey the Christian prohibition. Before leaving Japan, de Souza told the Tokugawa officials that a storm had forced him to ask the Dutch Governor-General for help, and he was supplied with sailors and a pilot in Batavia. The shogun grew suspicious about the Dutch, wondering if they supported the Portuguese. As a result, the Dutch were not allowed an audience with the shogun in 1648 and 49. Hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough, the Governor-General sent a missionary in 1649 to thank the Bakufu for the assistance offered to the Dutch sailors in the Breskens incident in 1643. VOC ship Breskens was dispatched to explore for a reputed gold and silver island, which was believed to be located off the northern coast of Japan. When the crew came ashore in Nambu, today's Iwate prefecture, they were captured and then brought to Edo. They were finally delivered to the Dutch chief in Nagasaki. The shogun indicated that he was willing to receive some missionaries who came to thank the Tokugawa leader for his tolerant attitude concerning the Breskens crew. The Governor-General and Francois Caron, a member of the council, decided to send an envoy to the shogun. The diary of the Dutch chief of this period, as well as the instructions from the envoy, are transcribed and translated into Japanese in the Historical Documents in Foreign Languages series, 日本関係海外資料、オランダ商館長日記 published by our institute。これが私のメインの仕事です。Yes、こんな感じです。Dr. Rainier Hessling describes circumstances of this event in Prisoners from Nambu. He argues that the Governor General and Caron cheated the shogun by sending an ambassador without credentials signed in Holland. I don't think, however, the shogun expected an ambassador with credentials because there was no tradition of credentials in Japan. Instead, I noticed a letter from the Governor General to the Nagasaki magistrates, written in Japanese. The original text was lost. The original text is lost, but a Dutch translation is extant in the archives of the Dutch factory. In the Japanese context, this is both a hosho, a letter of dismissive form written under the name of a low-class official for the actual sender, and a hirojo, a letter of condescending form addressed to a lower-class official for the real addressee. 日本の古文書学ではよく出てくる言葉なんですけど、オレンジと赤の組み合わせですね。偉い人のために実は下の人なんかサインをするっていうか、手紙を書くのはその下の人なんですけど、上の人の意向を聞いて出しましたっていう、事実上は上の人が出したことになるんですね。で、披露状っていうのは相手に直接書いたら失礼だから、相手の、今だったら秘書さん宛てに書いてこのように奏上してくださいというふうに頼む。でそれを2つ組み合わせると動いてる手紙は赤なんですけど、実質的にはその上の点々の赤の手紙だというふうに見なされることになります。日本のコンテクストではそうです。It could function as a letter from the superiors of the Dutch in Holland to the shogun. Presentation of the letter was ordered not to the envoy but to the chief of the Nagasaki factory. Some of the text is quoted below. 5 years ago, some Dutchmen were arrested near Nambu in Japan. They were absolved by extraordinary mercy of the emperor or the shogun and sent back to their homeland. Our superior in Holland heard of the incident and became most thankful. They discussed how to express their thanks for this special benefit by sending a special envoy. The gentlemen were willing to attach a letter expressing gratitude, but were anxious that the manner of the letter would be appropriate and modest enough to the emperor. They were also concerned whether the Dutch text would be acceptable in Japan because of the ignorance of Japanese traditions. Therefore, the gentleman ordered me to compose a letter in the most appropriate manner. According to the order, I, with this letter, respectfully ask your favor and help for the envoy before the emperor and to be appropriately dispatched. Who were the superiors? In the Japanese context, it can remain vague. In fact, the Nagasaki magistrates forwarded the letter to Edo without asking who the Dutch superiors were, and asked who they were after they received a positive answer from the Tokugawa headquarters. The envoy answered the superiors were the States General of the Dutch Republic, although the instructions for him ordered him to pretend that he was sent by the gentlemen 17, the directors of the VOC. Anyway, it did not matter for the shogun. 17世紀のオランダの国政はすごく 複雑で、少なくとも日本人にとっては連邦議会って呼んでいるものと、その総督オラニエ公っていうのがいて、で、連邦議会の特許を持って東インド会社っていうのがあって、その一番トップはまたその一人じゃなくて会議体なんですね。でそれの出先機関が今のジャカルタ、バタビアにあるっていう、この構造をとても幕府が理解できたと思えないですけど、誰か偉い人がオランダにいて、その人の手紙であればおそらく OK だと思っただろうと思います。After moving from the Dutch to the French company, Caron drafted the king's letter, Louis XIV, which he carried personally as ambassador in 1667. Caron, however, was not able to reach Japan. He came to Surat in India and had to go back to Europe because of differences with his French colleagues. Next, I will talk about the return incident in 1673. After leaving Japan in 1623, the English East India Company, or EIC, planned to reopen the Japan trade on the basis of its good relationship with the Chen family in Taiwan. 台湾亭主という人たちです。They thus sent a ship return. Simon Delvaux, the EIC envoy on return, was instructed to establish a Japan factory, but his and the EIC request was rejected thanks to the close relationship between the English and Portuguese kings. The VOC had anticipated the designs of the EIC and informed the Tokugawa authorities of the marriage between Charles II of England and Catherine, a Portuguese princess. Both English and Japanese documents related to this event are published in Japan, Nikkei Kousho Shiryo, Experiment and Return. ついでですか、エクスペリメントとリターンは両方船の名前なので資料集の名前なんですけど、偶然ですが try and error に見えますね。When the Japanese officials asked Delvaux the reason of his dispatch, he explained that he brought the king's letter to the emperor of Japan, or the shogun, in order to conduct commerce in Japan. However, the letter was not handed over to the Nagasaki authorities. Probably the substance of the petition was written down in Japanese and sent to Edo. In other words, the Tokugawa authorities treated Delvaux not as an ambassador but a merchant, mainly because he came to ask for trade. It is useful to quote the king's letter here. We, that means king, therefore do desire that your majesty would be pleased to afford them, company merchants, freedom of trade, protection, and encouragement. The great God that gave being to the world and appointed nature what it should bring forth in each country, whose products are various for the accommodation of human nature and society, had accommodated your majesty's empire and our kingdom so as more than ordinarily to suit in commerce with each other. Yours abounding in gold, silver, and copper, being of great use for the carrying on of commerce and trade, and our kingdoms affording such great varieties and quantities of woolen clothes and stuffs, fit for the clothing of all sorts of persons, which not only tend to the great health and fortifying the spirits and the delight of them that wear them, especially in such climates as your empire, but are much more lasting and cheaper than other clothing, which causes so many countries to desire them that our merchants do vend exceeding great quantities thereof. Sorry, ちょっと古い英語です。The letter mentioned the God without necessity. The letter itself indicates that the EIC headquarters had a lack of understanding about the Japanese. It did not even pretend to celebrate the shogun's enthronement or inform the Japanese side about the same event of their king. From the Japanese point of view, the elocution is not like a king, but a merchant. As return came to request permission for trade, it should be treated merely as a merchant ship. However, it did not close but rather enlarge the means for negotiation. In fact, the Nagasaki magistrate, Okano Magokuro, considered seriously accepting the EIC as a trading partner and asked the Dutch about possibility sharing Deshima. In Japan, Tokugawa subjects kept rights for petition, although they had to proceed step by step in any appeals. Finally, the Bakufu did not accept the English because it was not able to rely on their compliance with Tokugawa prohibitions on Christianity. After the return incident, no European embassies visited Japan for more than 100 years before the arrival of Adam Laxman from Russia. To be concluded, in the middle of the 17th century, some emissaries from European powers visited Japan, most of whom came under initiatives of their office in Asia. After the failure of Peter Knight, Dutch-Japanese trade stopped for several years. When it reopened, the Tokugawa logic to accept the Dutch emerged from the idea of seeing them as semi-subject without correspondence on the state level. This view paralleled the creation of Tokugawa subjects as a domestic two-for-one system that included prohibitions on Christianity. The VOC accepted the system because they saved the cost of sending diplomatic envoys and kept their rights for petition, although they had to do military service for the Bakufu and their agents had to suffer many troublesome regulations in Deshima. Emissaries dispatched in 1647, 67, and 73 from Portugal, France, and England respectively brought letters from their kings to the shogun, but they were not successful. One reason was their bases in the China Seas were weaker than those of the Dutch. That was why they didn't have enough understanding of Asian diplomatic customs and why the Tokugawa did not appreciate them. Some of the letters were expected to function as credentials and to promote trade and were not recognized as kokusho. As a result, the Bakufu treated the emissaries not as diplomatic embassies, but as merchants coming to petition for trade. The reason why the Bakufu rejected their petition has been researched and attributed to their incompliance of the Christian prohibition. I will add only one thing. From the Tokugawa point of view, the Bakufu could decide arbitrarily to accept the petition because it was not an interstate but a domestic matter. Foreign relations around Japan in the 17th century were based on kokusho diplomacy. In kokusho diplomacy, the letter bearer was not a negotiator or a representative. Correspondence functioned just to maintain mutual relations. The correspondence itself, including the form of the letter, determined the relationship between states. Actually, the members of the envoy party engaged themselves with commercial negotiations. But negotiations could not serve as the main task or raison d'etre of the dispatched party. I cannot say, however, if this East Asian framework of relations existed in similar form in other parts of the early modern world. What happened when the Europeans came into this framework? Both Asian states and European powers struggled to adapt to the new circumstances, but until the 19th century, Europeans had to compromise with Asian customs. On the other hand, the European newcomers wanted to negotiate and conclude mutual treaties because they didn't enjoy a place themselves in the existing diplomatic network. European merchants in the Asian seas did not keep strong patronage of their crowns, and it was impossible for them to frequently ask for royal letters for promoting their commerce. In case of the European envoys reached Nagasaki and the Japanese asked them if they wanted to negotiate as merchants or they wanted to be treated as diplomatic embassies, they chose naturally the first option. For the Tokugawa government too, it was easier to treat Europeans as merchants. Adam Kruro says that the Dutch lost their diplomatic prerogatives after the failure of Nuits, but I do not agree. The VOC just stopped sending embassies with diplomatic prerogatives. The Dutch chief, Indeshima, was not a diplomatic representative from the beginning. I do not want to conclude, however, that the Europeans are realists and the Asians are formalists. For example, after the Meiji Restoration in 1871, the Iwakura mission visited Europe, hoping to negotiate for revision of the unequal treaties. Did the European states accept the mission eagerly willing to negotiate? I do not think so. The case be made that they welcomed the mission in order to confirm the illusion of a Eurocentric world order. The Bakufu created a new framework to accept the Dutch merchants without formal correspondence. Such acceptance could be considered a privilege because the Governor-General of the VOC, for example, did not have to accept any Japanese junks in Batavia port. The privilege depended on the Bakufu reliance on the VOC, and it should control the agents totally, especially in line with Christian prohibitions. This was because long duration of the mutual relations between the Tokugawas and the VOC. Therefore, it was hard to apply for newcomers. When Russians came to Japan in the 18th century and 19th centuries, the Bakufu discussed their acceptance seriously, but created concrete policies not to accept any newcomers. The policy was called Sakoku. When Commodore Matthew Perry came to Uraga in 1853, he brought 2 letters from President Millard Fillmore, dated on the same day. One could be called a kokusho in order to be accepted as a diplomatic partner in Japan, and the other was a credential in order to open another way of diplomacy. When the Bakufu permitted him to negotiate, a new age of Japanese diplomacy started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. I think this being the Netherlands, there will be loads of questions about Tokugawa European relations. Anybody? Not from the Leiden. Any questions or remarks? Yes.
Well, it was an incidental question, but Klulo mentioned somewhere in his discussion of Nuits and the lessons the Dutch drew from Nuits' failure, that Specs, at that time somebody high in Batavia, decided that we should go for a different approach of Japan, no longer try to have diplomatic relations, but follow the example of Japanese daimyo and just say to the shogun, here we are and we would be willing to serve you in whatever respect, and please call on us when you need us. Huh? And then the immediate result, of course, was that Kukubaker had to shell Harajo. Do you think this interpretation of crew law is correct or not? Because I was greatly intrigued by it, but I didn't hear the name Specs, and I didn't hear this aspect of the Dutch-Japanese relations mentioned by you.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, maybe there was Specs behind Noit's incident. Is that your point? Sorry, ごめんなさい。日本語で教えてください。
日本語で言いますと、
はい。
ナウツがどういうか、外交官として江戸に行こうとしました。それが失敗したんです。それでスペックスがこういう手ではどうせ行かないから、日本の大名と同じようにオランダの召喚長も、ね、将軍の、家来としてね、死んであって将軍にご命令に従って何でもやりますというような約束をすればいいじゃないかと提案したんです。そういう話はクルーローのどっかに書いてあります。
日本の大名と同じかどうかはthere could be a discussion if the Dutch were similar to daimyo or vassals or similar to common people in Japan, for example, especially merchants. I'm wondering now, because the Dutch were ordered to do military service. Military service was a privilege for the daimyo or samurai rank in Japan. So the Dutch could be called just like daimyo. It's possible. But on the other hand, the Dutch were governed or ruled by the Nagasaki magistrates. It's a very special status in Japan, and very similar to the Nagasaki commoners. So I'm wondering now. And I don't want to talk about the Dutch group in Japan, but I want to separate diplomatic embassies and merchants residing in Japan. That is my point. Maybe from the Tokugawa point of view like this, but I prepared another totally different world image from the viewpoint of the VOC, because the Dutch came to Asia for a certain purpose, for benefit. So their thinking is always how to get benefit with weapon or diplomacy, like this. So diplomacy is always such kind of thing for the Dutch. There's a market, and try their A, B, and C, and the A is the biggest, maybe the shogun, and the VOC and their servants, they are competitive. オランダ東インド会社は独占ですが、職員はちょっとした貿易をできるんですね。で、それはフェオセイとの会社本体と常にコンペティティブであります。And other EIC or Portuguese or Chinese merchants, they are always competitive. How to monopolize our side and how to destroy their monopoly. That is their Pharisees' thinking. So they don't define their governor's level or ruler's level and commoner's level. All the Dutch are merchants, and the distance is very close, and alsoさっきの絵は横から見た感じですが、これは90度上から見たイメージなんですね。The Dutch did not define the two levels, I think. rulers level and commoners level, because their way of thinking is different. That's my point. But who rules or controls the marketplace? That's the problem. I can go back on.
Maybe we can take this up a little bit later. I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
何を言うんだ。そう、将軍から見ればおそらくマーケットをコントロールしているのが自分だと思っているでしょうと言いたかった。
Okay. Thank you very much.